Hi, I'm Scott Hoezee, Director of the Center for Excellence in Preaching at Calvin Theological Seminary, and that is a co-sponsor of the annual Symposium on Worship along with the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. We're glad that you're joining us for this conversation for this 2022 virtual Symposium on Worship. And we're very, very happy today to have Reverend Jeff Manion, who is the pastor of the Ada Bible Church in Ada, Michigan, but throughout West Michigan now, as our guest. And he and I are going to have a little conversation about preaching. And I hope that as you listen in on what we have to say, that it'll be edifying to you, a blessing to you, and give you lots of ideas. So welcome, Jeff.
Scott, so good to be with you today.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. So just remind our viewers, our listeners, of who you are, how long you've been at Ada Bible Church, just a little bit about you, and then some about the church.
A little bit of me. My father was a church planter in the western states, state of Idaho primarily, and then some significant transitions after that, a couple of years stopover in Grand Rapids, graduated from high school in Northern California, and then transplanted back to Grand Rapids. Our whole adult lives is spent here.
Okay.
Ada Bible Church, this is my 38th year at Ada Bible Church. So my whole adult ministry in one place, and it was a church that took the longest time to get off the ground. I was with Ada Bible Church for 7 years before we got up to 100 consistently. Solo pastor for 10 years during that time, and now 38 years, and it's grown to be a sizable church. We currently have 4 different campuses in the Grand Rapids area.
And about how many people are affiliated with or members or worship with you on a Sunday, let's say?
I don't know anymore. Pre-COVID, we were regularly, all campuses combined with kids, weekly attendance of 8,000-9,000 people.
Okay.
Currently, in-person services, perhaps 4,000 to 5,000, and we believe about that many online. So right now we're about 50% in person and 50% online each weekend.
Okay. And how many co-pastors and staff members roughly are you up to now? You were solo pastor for a while, but...
Yeah, full and part-time staff, 150 range.
Wow.
And while the sermon is filmed in one location and simulcast to each campus has a full staff. Okay. Campus pastor, youth pastor, small groups, women's ministry, custodial. And so each campus would be a larger church with, worship staff as well. So the only thing that's transmitted is the sermon each weekend.
Okay. Do you physically move around the campuses? Are you sometimes present at different campuses on a given Sunday, or are you always in just the main one?
The preaching is usually from the main one, and I try to preach in each of the campuses at least once, optimally twice a year. Okay. Number of challenges with that, just your amount of broadcast equipment that you have. So not every campus is a campus that can send a quality sermon. That's pretty much at our Cascade campus. But on those weekends that I'm not preaching, I travel around and visit another campus. Usually don't even have a platform moment, but just the campus pastor will say, "Hey, our senior pastor, Jeff Manion, is with us today," and I'll be by the sound booth and wave and then greet people in our foyer areas afterwards. So I am visiting campuses on weekends far more often than I'm preaching at those campuses.
Okay, great. So you mentioned that you were a solo pastor for 10 years, and of course, when you preached to the whole congregation at once in person. How many years ago did you shift to having more than one campus such that you were virtual on the screen in at least one place?
Yeah, that actually happened in a couple different steps. So I've been at the church for 38 years. I did the math 18 years ago was where we first started using a camera. Okay. And we didn't do it because of a strategic research. We kind of backed our way into it. One fall day, 2003, we're doing an important series. I pled with people, please be present at every sermon in this series. And people actually took us up on it. And what that meant was when I stood up on the platform to speak and looked out, we had 2 primary entrances, and there were chairs set up in those entrances going back into our foyer area, and every seat in the auditorium taken. Now, our area fire marshal happened to be in attendance that week.
Oh, good.
And notified us very quickly, you cannot block your entrances with chairs. And so the very next weekend, We set up a screen in our foyer area, set up a simple camera, and we would broadcast out to the atrium area, out to the foyer area. And we did that throughout that series. And we discovered that some people actually liked sitting in the foyer area with a cup of coffee and watching the screen rather than coming into the auditorium. We had 3 services at the time. Our third one was underperforming. We weren't interested in starting a 4th. And so that spring, which would have been the spring of 2004, we built a very simple building behind our church building. I mean, a glorified pole barn with a fancy face. You know, we call it the Panera Bread Building. It had just a slab, a sound booth, refreshment area, and then the platform. And what we tried to do was migrate the people who were in our foyer area watching every week out to this building. And it was one of the different leadership challenges when you make a change. This was one of the easiest ones we ever made, because when people asked, you know, why would anyone want to watch the sermon on a screen? It's kind of like, they already are. We're just now giving it a designated space. And Scott, interesting thing, some of the people that migrated to that room, we called it the annex, seated, I don't know, maybe 150 people, volunteer leader, volunteer worship leaders, had its own music. Some of the people that migrated to that were people that were with us when we were small and had stuck with us, but they weren't attending Ada Bible Church because we were a larger church. They were attending Ada Bible Church in spite of the fact that we were a larger church, but they loved those days when it was 100, 120 people, and some of those folks moved out to the annex. And so some 5 years after that, when we had we called that a video, video venue, a video room. It was right outside our building. It's as simple as technology. We ran a physical wire from the camera, the sound booth, down, to that building. And so it wasn't smart technology at all. But we started to ask if we could do this at a distance of 100 feet. Could we do this at a distance of 10 miles? And at that point, we had people driving a considerable distance. We thought, what if we put a location closer to their home where they could be more likely to drive when there's inclement weather, more likely to be motivated to drive their middle schooler in on a Wednesday night, show up for a women's event, and also more likely to invite someone that lives near them. And so the word multi-campus wasn't even in our vocabulary when we set up the screen out in our foyer that first day, but gradually became a multi-campus church. So that's a long way of saying it happened in stages. And but 18 years now that we've had a camera of one sort or another in the back of the room documenting the sermon, though our technology has changed over time.
So I'm guessing that the answer to my next question is probably going to be also it happened in stages. But as you reflect on your preaching, when it was all in person, everybody who was listening to you was in front of you physically, to the annex, to indeed a multi-campus church, what changed about your preaching, or maybe talk about your own learning curve? What did you start to realize you could do now that you couldn't do when everybody was live and in person? Or what things did you realize weren't going to work as well if you didn't toggle a little bit? So talk a little bit about sort of the evolution, the learning curve that you had to accommodate lots of people who are going to see you on a screen.
One of the things that I'm still attempting to adjust to, and that is because we have people watching from every campus, and now half of our people online. The vast majority of people, I'm not looking at them as I'm speaking. The hardest thing to do is to look into the camera and make major points or those heart-to-heart moments in the sermon where you just want to slow down and you just want to pastor looking into the camera so it feels like there's a better connection and a heart-to-heart connection. What's so hard about that is that oral communication class, entry level, eye contact, I mean, you would never speak to the back wall. So the fact that I have individuals in front of me and I'm looking past them, beyond them, and above them to make a heart-to-heart connection, that's one of the changes that I still find difficult. Some of the other changes over time weren't the physical sermon, but some of the simple technology steps we had to make, like in lighting. And the human eye is, the way God crafted the eye is just brilliant. It has this ability to adjust to darkness. And so you can walk out into a dark evening, and after time, your eye adjusts. A camera does not have that same ability. And so formerly, we had like canister lights or some simple type of stage light or spotlight. And we found that in order to really communicate to someone who's watching on camera, we need to pay a little bit more attention to lighting. Now, that's a hard sell, because if a deacon walks into the room, they go, I can see the platform fine. That's because your eye does a better job than a camera does. But you go to a wedding, you're outside, late afternoon, they're taking pictures, and the photographers are taking pictures, they have a flash unit. And you think, why would you need a flash unit? We can see each other fine. We can, the camera can't. And so there's a difference between standing on a lit stage and having lights actually pointed on you. And so in order to better communicate heart to heart with our congregation that's watching video, we had to pay some attention to lighting, and we'd really never paid attention to lighting. Another thing, we started out with 2 simple cameras, and a lot of times it was just a wide shot that took in the majority of the platform, and really needing to take advantage of a narrower shot, kind of a waist-up shot. And I just know that as churches have gone to online these days, a lot of times there's a beautiful stained glass window, or there's a tapestry, and you would love those to be seen. But communicating heart to heart, someone needs to see my expressions, they need to see my gestures, and so even the simplest level camera has a zoom capability to be able to go from that wide shot, maybe when the sermon begins, to a tighter shot so that there can be a heart-to-heart connection. And so some of the things were the sermon themselves, and some of those things were just those things around the sermon that we didn't even know we had to pay attention to 18 years ago that just gradually grew into, over time.
Yeah, I want to ask about that in a second, but I will say in terms of the lighting, I guest preached at a church some years ago, which was a large church.
Yeah.
When it came time for the sermon, they turned down the house lights, and I was in like Klieg lights, and I could see no one. Yeah. Which I found to be totally disorienting, because I could not see anything but blackness in front of me.
You're speaking into the darkness.
I mean, there were hundreds of people out there. I couldn't see them.
And you lose all the feedback. Someone nodding, someone reaching down and taking notes. Yeah.
It's interesting because, and I wonder, you can comment on this too, but the number one thing that I heard from pastors who had to go all virtual in the pandemic was missing, and most of these were not pastors who were in call and response churches, so they get amens, and they're very quiet. But it turns out the congregation signals in 1,000 little ways.
Oh my!
And in the absence of people, they felt lost as to how the sermon was going.
Yeah. Let me make a distinction there too. There's a difference between preaching to a room of people with a camera and preaching to a camera.
Right.
And at Ada Bible Church, March, when 2020, right? Yeah. When we, with the rest of the state, stopped having in-person services. And I didn't start preaching in person until September. So it's 6 months of speaking, to a lens.
Right.
And that's a completely different challenge than preaching to a room of people. Oh yes, and there's a camera there also, because of the physical cues. And so, I don't know, how many of participants in the conference do you think are exclusively delivering content with no real congregation sitting there that they see? Are most back to in-person?
I think most are back, but I think one of the things that people are finding is that pastors are finding is that not everybody has come back.
Yeah.
And so they're still live streaming. Some were doing it all along anyway, but even those that switched to it are still doing it. And they're finding, so they're now really dealing with the fact that they have to be aware that probably half of their congregation, maybe, is at home in their jammies. And the other half is in person. So they're trying to toggle, they're trying to do both. Right?
Yeah, let me say a word about each of those, because I found the challenge of speaking to a camera much harder than speaking to a room half full with a camera that is also live streamed. And speaking to a camera, I just had to remind myself again and again, you're not speaking to an empty room. Because it felt, here I am, there's a camera person, there's a sound person, I'm speaking to an empty room. I literally had to think of specific people in my life that needed to hear that message this weekend. And as I'm looking at that little camera lens, I'm speaking heart to heart to them. And so I think that was critical. Move the camera closer. There was a time when we used the same cameras that we had in the back of the room when I was on a platform. It was like me and then a sea of empty chairs and then the cameras back there. And Scott, we ended up building just a little platform feet away from my platform so that I could feel just a closer connection to the camera guys. And we also started bringing in I bring in 3 or 4 friends just to be able to see them at a glance and to get something, some kind of feedback back. I felt one week, someone said, what does it feel like preaching to an empty room? I said, there's no feedback. I said, I feel like a snowboarder in a competition that finishes a run and you stand there at the bottom of the run with your board waiting for them to see your score, just give your score, and then you go, yeah, we'll get back with you in a couple days. Because it was going to be, we were filming on Friday, showing it on Sunday, and I just felt this void, between stimulus and response. So that's its own challenge, speaking to a camera. Speaking with a camera, that is, there are individuals there, maybe the room's half full, and I have to have knowledge that that camera is there. One of the things, as I mentioned, is attempting to make some main points looking toward the camera, which feels counterintuitive. And also, every week, I recognize the online, those who are joining us online. You chose that word, that term carefully. We're here, we're gathered, we're meeting. And so in this, even when we had campuses, I say, man, today we began part 2 of our series, Renew. And those of you worshiping with us at our other campuses, hey, and also those of you who join us online so faithfully, week after week. I'm just so pleased that we can be together today. And so, not just a greeting, but a genuine, warm, I know you're there type greeting. And then sometimes in an illustration, I was speaking on Jacob a couple weeks ago, when Jacob is fleeing from Esau. The word the scripture uses, he fled. Now, I don't think Esau's chasing him, but he doesn't know that. He's lied to his dad. He's ripped off his brother. He's heading 600 miles north to a place he's never been, to relatives he hopes to find. He lays down, it's a story at Bethel, lays down, coat for a pillow, stone for a blanket. I describe Jacob as being alone and afraid. And that was one of those just heart-to-heart moments, where I not only needed to recognize the people in the room, but I wanted to recognize people at home. He said, I just can't imagine today how many of you would say that those 2 words described you. Alone and afraid. How many of you have walked into one of our campuses today? You went, dude, that's me. Jeff, that's me. And I don't know what living room, family room, or hotel room you're watching from. But today, if you find yourself alone and afraid, what we're going to discover is that the very space where Jacob found himself alone and afraid was the very space where God chose to meet him. And so, attempting even in the living room, family room, to go again, I know you're there. Last week, I spoke on Joshua, where Joshua 24, choose you this day who you will serve. For me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Sets up a stone monument, a standing stone. Visuals, I had a picture of a standing stone from Israel. And just saying, some of you, there are times when it's decision time. It's decision time. Choose this day. It's decision time. Some of you 15 years from now are going to be able to walk into one of our campuses and walk your children up to the 4th row where you were seated, and you say, in January 2022, right here is where I gave my life back to God, where I renewed my commitment. Well, what if you weren't at a campus that day? Some of you will be able to point the spot on a bike trail where you were on a walk and you were listening to a sermon with your phone, and you stopped there and you said, right here, right now, it's decision time. I need to give my heart back to the Lord. And you can identify that spot on a bike trail. So even in that place where you were sitting in a church versus trying to imagine some other space, that someone's in. But I guess those are just different ways of saying we see you, we care about you, We know you're there. And we're gathered here, and we hope that something powerful happens today, but we hope that something powerful happens in your living room, family room, as we meet.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's brilliant. And on that, so I've heard you preach, and I'm listening to you right now. And I know that you are extremely good at forging that pastoral connection. At those moments in the sermon, how much of that is on you to make sure you're connecting? Or are your camera operators or your sound and video people cued in enough ahead of time, or just by their own instinct to do a close-up or to move in?
Yeah.
I mean, is it just you looking out into the camera because you know this is that moment?
Yeah.
Or do your tech people help you a little bit to make sure that that moment connects?
Yeah, I'm not producing the services. I'm on the platform.
Right.
And so the cameras that I speak to, one is a wide shot, one is a tight shot, and they got the switcher that goes back and forth between the two. When I'm on the platform, if I'm looking back at that camera area, I'm not choosing between them because they're relatively close to each other. It's their job to ensure that we've got a fairly tight shot at that moment. And so I've got someone who directs our technology, and then there's Tyler who does most of the switching most weeks. So that's not on me, that's on them to ensure that happens. But we've also had this 18-year run of tweaking so that we didn't have to figure out how to do this the first time in March of 2022. And so a bunch of our learnings had taken place before then. By the way, just something that I'm overjoyed about is our chief technology, let me brag on this guy, Jeff Abbott, who's our chief technology guy. We sent word out when COVID hit that if a ministry needed some assistance in figuring out how to produce an online product for the first time, how to go live with online with their services, or to improve it, that they could contact Jeff. Scott, he's helped over 100 churches. Wow. Either just a phone call to ask some technology questions, or visiting and say, okay, here's your lighting challenge, or, with an $800 camera, this is what you could probably do, and that's probably all you need. And then encouraging them, with tight shot, wide shot, And so anyway, I'm just so glad that the lead up that we had not only served us, but the lengthy runway that we had leading to COVID also enabled us to serve dozens and dozens and dozens of other ministries as they were trying to figure that out. And that's one of our greatest joys at this point. Yeah. Not to be a healthy church, but how to try to become a healthy church that helps grow and build other healthy churches.
Yeah, that's great. Thinking about preaching and homiletics just generally for a minute. Now, it's very hard to talk about anything these days without factoring in the pandemic because it has disrupted everything for so long. But if you had to identify the top 1, 2, 3 issues in preaching today, things that for the 21st century, with or without the pandemic, and issues that may persist after the pandemic, assuming we get to an after, right? Which we all assume. But what are some of the issues in preaching that preachers you think should bear in mind as they craft their sermons? The top 1, 2, 3, however many you want to talk about.
Yeah, well, let me pick one that would transcend COVID. This was a challenge before COVID, it will be a challenge after COVID. And let me pick another one that is more related specifically to that zone that we find ourselves in right now. I find it a considerable challenge in preparation for each weekend to only do 2 things well. To try to understand the section of Scripture that we're talking about and to present that section of Scripture, whether it's a psalm, whether it's from 1 Corinthians, or whether it's from Jacob or Joshua. That is to bring the story of the Bible to the people I'm entrusted to teach. The second thing is then to make that life relatable. So it's a bridge back 2,000 plus years to the story of the Bible to tell that story well, and then taking the bridge forward 2,000 years to make the sermon application-oriented and driven. And Scott, I think there are people that are masters at either of those. Masters at application, don't really take you to the story of the Bible, but great points that are life-related. And other people that just verse 2, verse 3, verse 4, verse 5, you get to the end, you really don't know what that has to do with your daughter that isn't coming home at night, your mom showing early signs of Alzheimer's, your company is talking about closing a whole department, and it's your department. And so doing one of those things well is hard. Trying to do both those well, week after week after week after week. Take me to God's word, expose the scriptures to me, and please, please relate that to my life throughout the message. I just think that is a heroic task, and it's time-consuming, and it's a major challenge that, for me, is not going to go away. But I think that's one of the major challenges of our day, to try to do those two things well. Yeah. Something COVID-related. And by COVID, I just don't mean the virus. By COVID, I mean all of the upheaval in the last, going on 2 years now. It starts with the virus, it transitions into the racial tension and upheaval that we've experienced, and how to respond to that. A volatile election, and then COVID, like bookending it, not leaving. And so it's not that thing. It was like this perfect storm. And so I think one of the most critical elements of preaching right now, you talk about preaching being at least two things. One is the preparation of the sermon, and the other one is the preparation of the preacher. I interact with people confessing record levels of discouragement and disappointment. One of the biggest things that has to happen in our hearts on a weekly level is in here. Because we have the responsibility of standing on a platform and talking about the grace of God, talking about joy, and talking about hope. And if we stopped believing in the goodness of God long ago, that's hard. And so one of my tasks that just got harder in the last 2 years is, through the disappointment in people's disappointment in me for not handling one of these in the right way, being too far to the right or too far to the left, you try to take a big swath in the middle and you lose people on both ends. And there's just a discouragement that sets in. Yeah. And I just have to remind myself, Scott, week after week after week after week, that the greatest gift I bring to Ada is, I have a pretty strong teaching gift. The biggest gift I bring to Ada Bible Church is not my teaching gift. And I've got a passable leadership gift, not managerial leadership, but kind of high-level leadership. The biggest gift I bring to my fellowship is not my leadership gift. The biggest gift I bring to my congregation is a heart that is alive to God. It's a walk with Jesus worth having. And I think what this season does for us is it calls on us as men and women of God who open the scriptures to have to ask God to meet us regularly and routinely so that we still believe about grace. You know, grace, we throw the word around. Grace is that aspect of God's character that is wildly generous. And because of disappointment, life disappointment, family disappointment, congregational disappointment, we can come to a point where we simply no longer believe in the generosity of God. And so I think, quite frankly, one of our greatest challenges is to do the heart work and to have a fresh encounter with the goodness of God that enables us and empowers us to stand before a congregation in front of us and online and to talk about hope and to talk about joy and to talk about the generosity of God in terms that we actually believe and are sold on. Yeah.
Are there things, so it goes without saying you don't personally know a lot of the people to whom you preach. You know some, I'm sure, but it's not like the old days when you knew everybody's name, right? What do you do? I mean, so often when I grade student sermons, they often stop just short of that application piece. And part of it is they haven't lived long enough or they haven't had enough pastoral experience to realize all the needs and all the hurts that are out there.
Yeah.
You don't know everybody personally, but are there things you do other than being a fully alive human being with a beating heart yourself? Are there things you do that keep those issues, the daughter who doesn't come home at night, the parent coming down with Alzheimer's, are there things you do to keep that sensitivity alive in you?
I was given some very early gifts. One of those, my mom was killed in an automobile accident when I was 12 years old, leaving a church planter dad with 5 children. Wow. My sister was 13, I was 12. My younger brothers was 9, 4, and 2 months old. And my 2-month-old brother lived through the accident that killed my mom. When we moved to Grand Rapids shortly after that, my dad remarried a 21-year-old, recent college graduate, secretary at the Bible school where he worked. And so, and then the move to Northern California. I call that a gift because I realized that you could wake up one day and realize that your entire life had been tipped upside down and that could lead you on a series of events that were also disruptive. 1 funeral, 1 wedding, and 2 cross-country moves later. Everything changes. Yeah. I think that gave me a sympathy and a connection to someone who comes home and their husband or wife says, I don't love you, and I'm not sure I ever did. The person who walks in to their place of work and they're escorted out 20 minutes later because their department is closed and everything's tipped upside down. I don't rely exclusively on what happened to me when I was 12. My daughter, my oldest, her oldest child, Hazel, has Down syndrome. Watched them. Now she's just a beautiful, brilliant little 5-year-old girl that we treasure. But the challenges that they went through in multiple intensive care unit stays, open heart surgery when she was 4 months old, weighed a little more than 10 pounds. My father has early Alzheimer's. And now that 21-year-old stepmom that he married at the time, she's 67, he's 82, and we watch her attempt to navigate life with him as his memory has changed. So I guess part of the answer is I don't have to look, that teenage daughter that doesn't come home. I had a teenage son. We parented 3 kids, and now they're in their early 30s, but not all of that was easy and sometimes very challenging. Now we're grandparents. And so, first of all, I'd just say from our own story has not been free from a few waves and outright tragedy and some significant challenges that we're, even with my dad's Alzheimer's, navigating now. And then just keeping my ears open. Every funeral that I do, every person that I interact with says, my sister was in an accident last week. We don't know if she's going to make it. Just help you. And joys, someone who comes up with, I want to show you a picture of my grandson, and they show you, it's the ultrasound picture. And they go, we're going to be grandparents. And so just attempting, we finally found a house. We had 4 offers, finally found a house. And so just trying to stay alert. I don't have a filing cabinet for these things, but I hope to have a memory of being able to discern. These are some of the vast disappointments. These are some of the incredible challenges. And these are some of the joys that are emerging, at the same time. Sure. And so even though you don't know every individual story, you can attempt to know these stories that God is telling of faithful people in challenging times through your congregation.
Yeah, wonderful. One final question for you, and it's a little less heavy, maybe a little more practical, but I do know a lot of preachers have talked about this. You mentioned earlier that you had a sermon series a while back, and you said you got to come all the time, and people stepped up and they did. Yeah. What I hear from a lot of preachers now is that for a lot of the millennials, regular church attendance is once every 3 or 4 weeks. How do you sustain? Now, obviously, they can go back and watch services they missed, but if you do a sermon series, are there any tips you have for how to keep people coming along who missed some?
Yeah, I do have a tip. I don't know how successfully I do it, but I know I need to do it. And particularly in a series where you're journeying with someone through their life, like the life of Abraham, and now you're in Sermon 5, and Abraham's offering Isaac, David in the Absalom incident, and how much terrain is covered. Where this is mastered is in a TV series where it might be halfway through the second season, and the first minute, they've mastered this in a minute, to go, previously on Justified. And somehow, they bring you those 2, 3, or 4 scenes that kind of catch you up, right, so you see what the ongoing dilemma is, who the main character is, what the ongoing dilemma is, and kind of like what's in play. And I think there's an art there, but it's also a craft to be able to go, okay, previously in Abraham, basically to say, God told him to move, and I'll bless you, I'll bless you. I'll bless you with land, I'll bless you with a family. And this was an infertile couple. But after years of waiting, finally, they're holding this baby for the first time. You know, and so do I have to cover, and they moved to Egypt, and Hagar, and there was a famine, and Lot, you know, dividing. And so I go, okay, of all of those stories that we hit, what do they really have to know to get this today? And it might be God made promises, they've been waiting forever, and finally he's got his son. So to boil it down to a synthesis that, I guess the question is, what do they have to know in order to get this today?
Yeah, that's great. Well, Jeff Manion, thank you so much for joining us at Worship Symposium 2022. Thank you for all of you who have watched and tuned in. It's been a blessing for me to have this conversation with Jeff. I hope it was for you as well. And I hope the larger symposium in 2022 will also bless you mightily. Thank you.
And wherever you're watching from, whatever living room or family room or office, may our gracious God bless you, and may he give you stamina for this next season.